This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Look, disclaimer in this video, right? I think Kevin Stefanski is a good coach. Now, I know that's a controversial opinion in Browns world these days, or at least if you read the comment section, you would be convinced that that's a controversial opinion. And it might still be a controversial opinion, but I do think Kevin's a good coach. But regardless of whatever my opinion of Kevin Stefanski is, he's in a particular spot, not necessarily with his job security, because I don't think the Browns are putting him on the hot seat anytime soon. I know some people feel like he might get fired this year. Me personally, knowing how the team has talked about this season, what the internal expectations are for this season, I find it very difficult to believe that they would fire Kevin Stefanski based on pure results of this season, right? I think it would take something more dysfunctional internally to make the Browns fire Kevin. And I'm talking about like some of the stuff that happened with Hugh Jackson at the end. Like you would have to find out that Kevin's not like showing up to meetings or like it would have to be internally dysfunctional rather than the results on the field just aren't what we want them to be right now, which is the variety that we're at. I think Browns fans want Kevin fired because the results aren't what they want, or some decisions are being made that they don't feel like are beneficial to the team. But yeah, I don't think the Browns fire Kevin this season, especially during the year, unless it gets to that point. And I don't think they're going to fire him this even like for next year, regardless of the record. I think his job is pretty safe here. And the reason his job is safe is because I think that ownership and the front office believe in him, right? The two people who could fire him, I think they believe in him, right? I think Jimmy Haslam believes in him a ton. I think Jimmy Haslam also believes a ton into Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. And I believe that Andrew Berry truly believes in Kevin Stefanski at a high level as well. And I don't see anything happening this year that's going to really break that, right? I don't think a bad season this year is really going to break that, given that the expectations internally aren't that great. People might not want to hear that, but that's kind of where we are, right? That's where the truth is. You know, whether you think it's justified to be in that place, that's a matter of personal opinion, right? And I'm not really saying that Kevin's going to be here next year out of personal opinion, you know, even though I think that Kevin is a good coach. But that's just what everything that you hear around it sounds like it's going to be. But I think it is important to acknowledge that this Browns team is teetering into a dangerous place that they ought to be really, really careful about falling into. And I'm concerned that they might not be fully aware of it. What am I talking about? We'll answer that in just a second, but I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Hey, real quick, I want to tell you about a little bit of a sleeper of an app called Sleeper. Has fantasy, has news feed, has picks. You can do it all on the Sleeper app. Make sure you use it. Sign up using the promo code WORSTTAKE and get to 100% match on up to $100 when you use promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, 100% match for up to $100 when you use promo code WORSTTAKE. You have a great day. Now let's continue the video. Yeah, so Tyvis said this, and it made me really think. The worst thing about losing is getting used to it, and the Browns are flirting with that right now. Got to find a way to get a win soon. I just want the winning culture back from 2 years ago. And Tyvis is a fan. He's also played in the NFL, right? So, like, when it comes to, like, understanding the vibe in the locker room and how that affects things and how that affects development, like, this dude knows what he's talking about there. And it made me think about kind of how people talk about this season. And one of the things that's, like, while I understand the expectations for this year aren't going to be for the Browns to win the Super Bowl, I need the Browns to still go out there and try to win as many games as possible, because I do think Tyvis is correct, right? You don't want this team to feel like it's okay to lose, right? And you don't want these young players, especially, to start learning that it's okay to lose. Some people don't appreciate that. Some people do. I'm not one of these people who are like okay with tanking. You know what I mean? I think tanking is a bad strategy, not because it doesn't make sense on a computer. It does. If you're playing football on a computer, it makes perfect sense. If you're playing Madden, this is a perfectly valid strategy in Madden, is to tank. But when you're playing actual football with actual people who have actual consciousnesses and feelings and emotions, and that dictates how they learn lessons, then I think we start to understand why it is that tanking is such a terrible strategy, because it's a strategy that works in theory but is horrific on the people that you enact that strategy on. And the very nature of football is, if you're going to tank, some of the players you tank to get, you're going to have to tank with, and you're starting to damage the development of those players in pursuit of getting more players. It's why I say this all the time. Tanking has never brought a team a championship. It's just not a good strategy. It's one of those things that people have convinced us is the smart idea because it's not emotional. But when we're talking about a sport where emotions are going to be important, where the human aspect is going to be important, then it starts to become stupid to act like that's not a factor, and why I think tanking is stupid. And that's what I'm concerned about, right? Regardless of how I feel about Kevin Stefanski, right? I think Kevin's a good coach. Again, Kevin gets fired. I think he'll pop up somewhere else and be good, right? But if Kevin keeps losing games, then it's not going to matter if Kevin's a good coach, right? Because these guys are going to be used to losing. They're going to not just be used to losing, they're going to be used to losing with Kevin Stefanski, right? Which means one of the only ways to kind of make it feel different is you're going to have to fire Kevin Stefanski. Right? You're putting yourself in a position to get rid of somebody because you have to, but knowing that getting rid of that person has the potential to bite you in the ass. Wake me up if this sounds familiar, right? Because this is similar to what the Browns' position they were in with Baker Mayfield, or at least the position they put themselves in with Baker Mayfield, where they bet on Deshaun Watson thing. It didn't work out. They gave up on Baker. And look, Baker needed to go somewhere else to be successful. I firmly believe that, but it's not going to feel any better knowing that when you see him successful somewhere else. So that's... And if we work back to the Browns, if you're somebody who thinks Kevin is a good coach, but they keep losing and these guys keep getting used to losing. And one of the things that concerned me is this was a close game, and I felt like at the end of this game, there were some folks, and I'm not going to name any names because I don't think it's fair to do so, that looked okay with it. Some veteran players, some leaders on this team that kind of looked okay with it. They were fine with losing. And I don't think that's acceptable. I think this week's going to be incredibly important for the Cleveland Browns and for Kevin Stefanski's future. Because, again, I don't think Kevin's getting fired this year, and he's probably not going to get fired. If everything keeps going wrong, he probably won't get fired until, maybe halfway or all the way through 2026, right? They're going to give him the next couple of years because they don't deem him responsible for the Deshaun Watson disaster. And they understand that the Deshaun Watson disaster has put this team at an adverse place where you can't just make decisions on everybody based on wins and losses, especially people who weren't responsible for the Deshaun Watson disaster, or at least you don't deem as fully responsible for the Deshaun Watson disaster, which the Browns have indicated that is the case, especially with Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry as well. So that means, but you can put Kevin in a position to when he finally gets to the place where he should be successful, he will have a harder time than he should, because now he's gotten these guys used to losing, and they're used to losing with him, and they don't think of him as somebody who can help them win. And that's going to have its own issues with development. And you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to have to get somebody else in here. And the job's not the most attractive job in the world. And you might not get the candidate that you want to get. The top candidate, he might want to go somewhere else. Very likely will want to go somewhere else, unless the Browns got like a quarterback that showed a lot of promise or something like that. But if that's the case, then I don't think Kevin's getting fired. So, you put yourself in a bad situation. There's a franchise if you don't try to win games. And this week, I think is going to be important because I want to see how they respond to this loss. Because I think they should be embarrassed by this loss. Not because Minnesota's that bad of a team, right? Minnesota's a fine team. They're in a similar place than you. They were a 13-win team last year, right? Like, it's not embarrassing to lose to Minnesota, or even to factor in that you lost to Minnesota with Carson Wentz. You're starting Dylan Gabriel. It's not that different, right? Like, they looked at this game as a winnable game, just like Browns fans looked at this game as a winnable game. I'm not saying anything about the Minnesota Vikings and why this loss should be embarrassing. It should be embarrassing because of the specific way that you lost it. Offensively, they should be embarrassed because they were one play being made away from winning this game, and they had a whole quarter worth of chances to win this game. They should be embarrassed. While Dylan has made some positive steps in his first game, he should be embarrassed that he couldn't get a first down to ice that game out. He should feel like he's capable of doing that. Jerry Jeudy should be embarrassed that he didn't make a play at the end of the game to ice this thing out. David Njoku should be embarrassed that he didn't make a play at the end of this game to ice this game out, right? Quincy, I'm going to give a little break to because he was the only player making plays in the second half, and that led to the team, the Vikings basically just saying anybody but him make a play. So if you're anybody but Quinshon Judkins and you didn't make a play in that fourth quarter, you should be embarrassed because you should think of yourself as somebody who can make that play, right? Is that wrong? But if we go out there kind of ho-hummy against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's going to really raise a lot of questions about like, do we even believe that we're better than this? Do we even believe that winning is something that we should do? And are they ever going to believe that under Kevin Stefanski? Again, they were there. They won games with them in 2020 and 2023, but long stretches of losing have damaging effects. And has it been too much losing in too long of a stretch? Has the message been permanently muted? And have we put ourselves in a position where, hey, whether you think highly of the coach or not, you might have to get rid of him? Defensively, they should be embarrassed by this loss as well because it's supposed to be an elite defense. Minnesota, regardless of how you shake it, weren't supposed to be an elite offense. And this is the team that has had the most success from scrimmage from you all year. Carson Wentz is the guy who had the most success from scrimmage against the Cleveland Browns defense all year. All the quarterbacks they played, Carson Wentz is the dude. They should be embarrassed. I know people are like, the offense, they should have done more. Yes, obviously the offense should have done more. And again, I just said they should be embarrassed. Kevin should be embarrassed by this offense. Tommy Rees should be embarrassed by this offense. And they should go into this week versus Pittsburgh trying to prove that this is not who they are. But this defense should be particularly embarrassed. Myles Garrett should be embarrassed, right? How they come into this game versus Pittsburgh will tell me a lot about what the future is for the leadership on this team. Because I see some good things. I think Kevin's a good coach. I think Andrew Berry's done a great job with the draft class. I think he's done a great job with cap management. But if they can't get that locker room to a place to where they are embarrassed about losing a game in the way that they lost this game, and they don't put that focus into this week's game versus Pittsburgh, and I get it, Pittsburgh's a weird game at Pittsburgh, but put the focus into that game and try to prove that that's not who you are. Because if we go into Pittsburgh saying, we suck, this is who we are, and we just lay an egg versus them, nobody's going to feel confident in Kevin Stefanski ever again. Unless like he goes on a miracle 8-win streak run or something like that, it's going to take a lot to get people confident in Kevin Stefanski again. Internally and externally. That's just what it is. It's going to take a lot for people to get confident about the Cleveland Browns in general. So, look, I'm somebody who doesn't want to clean house. I'm somebody who understands the damage that cleaning house does to the talent that you have on the team and your ability to develop it. But I also understand the damage that losing does to your team. And the fact is that this team needs to find ways to win games soon. They don't got to go to the playoffs. They don't got to win 10 of them, but they got to find ways to be competitive. Well, they're competitive already. They got to find ways to win games soon, right? They got to make that jump from being competitive to winning games again. They got to play meaningful football again in the wintertime, because right now we're not on track. Yeah, you ain't got to make the playoffs. Maybe you don't even got to go 500, but you got to be able to play meaningful football in December. You know, if you want to keep certain things intact, that I think will be important. You know, if you want to keep a culture intact that will get it so that if you do get a quarterback, you can get to winning. If you want to keep a culture of accountability intact on your team, that's going to be necessary. So, you know, all that losing's going to do is going to create the same old stuff. So they got to find ways to win games. And I think how they approach this game versus Pittsburgh, a game that they chose to have instead of a bye week, it's going to say a lot about this football team and who they are, right? I don't know if they're going to win that game. They've not won that game in Pittsburgh for a long time, but I better be damn proud of how they played in that game at the end of it, right? I better not be sitting here like I'm embarrassed about how we showed up. Because if I'm embarrassed about how we showed up, then we ain't got it. We ain't got it from a leadership perspective. And that's when guys get traded. That's when David Njoku gets the boot, right? You know, that's when leadership has to go. And maybe that involves Kevin. Maybe they decide it doesn't this year. But that's where I can't really blame folks for doing it. So, again, I don't know if you're going to win or lose this game next week. It's going to be a tough task. Pittsburgh playing good football. They're coming off a bye week. And you haven't won that game in Pittsburgh in years, decades, at least in the regular season. But I want to be proud of how this team plays on Sunday. I want the coaching staff to be excited about how this team is preparing this week. I want there to feel like there's a sense of focus in the building because they want to show the world that they're not that. If there's no urgency, if there's no reason to prove that, if they're fine with what they did in this game versus Minnesota, then that tells you where the culture is, and the culture ain't where you need it. Y'all let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.